Chapter 8. How do organisms reproduce? It is the large numbers of organisms belonging to a single species that bring them to our notice. If there were to be only one non-reproducing member of a particular kind, it is doubtful that we would have noticed its existence. How do we know that two different individual organisms belong to the same species? Usually, we say this because they look similar to each other. Thus, reproducing organisms create new individuals that look very much like themselves. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand. Do organisms create exact copies of themselves? Modes of reproduction used by single organisms. Sexual reproduction in plants and animals. Thus, reproduction at its most basic level will involve making copies of the blueprints of body design. We know that the chromosomes in the nucleus of a cell contain information for inheritance of features from parents to next generation in the form of DNA, that is, deoxyribonucleic acid molecules. The DNA in the cell nucleus is the information source for making proteins. If the information is changed, different proteins will be made. Different proteins will eventually lead to altered body design. A basic event in reproduction is the creation of a DNA copy. Cells use chemical reactions to build copies of their DNA. This creates two copies of the DNA in a reproducing cell, and they will need to be separated from each other. The DNA copies generated will be similar, but may not be identical to the original. Some of these variations might be so drastic that the new DNA copy cannot work with the cellular apparatus it inherits. Such a newborn cell will simply die. On the other hand, there could still be many other variations in the DNA copies that would not lead to such a drastic outcome. Thus, the surviving cells are similar to, but subtly different from each other. The importance of variation populations of organisms fill well-defined places, or niches, in the ecosystem, using their ability to reproduce. The consistency of DNA copying during reproduction is important for the maintenance of body design features that allow the organism to use that particular niche. Reproduction is therefore linked to the stability of populations of species. However, niches can change because of reasons beyond the control of the organisms. If a population of reproducing organisms was suited to a particular niche and if the niche were drastically altered, the population could be wiped out. However, if some variations were to be present in a few individuals in these populations, there would be some chance for them to survive. Thus, if there were a population of bacteria living in temperate waters, and if the water temperature were to be increased by global warming, most of these bacteria would die. But the few variants resistant to heat would survive and grow further. Variation is thus useful for the survival of species over time. Modes of reproduction used by single organisms.
Asexual reproduction. Production of new individuals without the fusion of the male and the female gamete is called asexual mode of reproduction. Organisms undergoing this kind of reproduction produce offsprings that are morphologically and genetically identical to them. Offsprings thus produced do not show variations and are called clones. In the asexual mode of reproduction, a new plant is grown from a part of the plant other than the seeds. Asexual reproduction only occurs through mitotic cell division. Asexual modes of reproduction are common in organisms having simple organizations such as algae and fungi. It is a fast process. There are different methods by which organisms reproduce asexually. These are fission, fragmentation,
regeneration,
budding, vegetative propagation, spore formation. Types of asexual reproduction in lower organisms. Fission. Fission is a type of asexual reproduction, where the parent cells divides into two or more daughter cells. There are two types of fission, namely binary fission and multiple fission. Binary fission. Binary fission consists of divisions of the nucleus followed by the division of cytoplasm, producing two cells, each having a daughter nucleus. Most of the unicellular animals prefer this method for reproduction. These organisms reproduce by binary fission, especially when conditions are favorable. That is, adequate amount of food and moisture is available. Binary fission is somewhat similar to mitosis. The mother cell divides into two daughter cells, and each daughter cell begins its life like a new individual. The parent generation ceases to exist after binary fission. Amoeba is a very good example of the organism which reproduces by binary fission. Simple binary fission. When the cytoplasmic division passes through any plane, the fission is called simple binary fission. Example, amoeba. In unicellular organisms like planaria and paramecium, the splitting of the cells during division can take place along any plane. This is called transverse binary fission. In leishmania, binary fission occurs in definite orientation in relation to the whip-like structures located at one end of the cell. This is called longitudinal binary fission. In plants, binary fission can be seen in bacteria, yeast, and euglena. Multiple fission. In multiple fission, the nucleus of the parent cell undergoes repeated divisions to produce many daughter nuclei. The cytoplasm also divides and cleaves around each nucleus, forming several daughter cells in the parent cell. When conditions become unfavorable, that is, food, moisture, proper temperature, etc., are not available, this is the preferred mode of reproduction by unicellular organisms. The organism develops a thick coating around itself. This is called cyst. The cyst helps the organism to tide over the bad phase. The nucleus divides into several nuclei and each daughter nucleus is surrounded by a membrane. All metabolic activities stop in the organism after cyst formation. When favorable conditions return, the cyst dissolves or breaks down, releasing the daughter nuclei. The daughter nuclei, in turn, grow into new individuals. Plasmodium and amoeba undergo cyst stage when they are not in the body of their prime host, that is, humans. In plants, multiple fission is seen in algae. Fragmentation. Mature parent body divides into two distinct pieces, that is, fragments, which grow into new individuals. Example, Spirogyra, an alga. Other organisms that show fragmentation are flatworm, planaria. Algae are green, thread-like plants and grow in stagnant water, ponds and lakes. They float on the surface of the water.
Regeneration. Many fully differentiated organisms have the ability to give rise to new individual organisms from their body parts. That is, if the individual is somehow cut or broken up into many pieces, many of these pieces grow into separate individuals. For example, simple animals like planaria can be cut into any number of pieces and each piece grows into a complete organism. This is known as regeneration.
Budding. The process of reproduction by the formation of a small bud-like projection from the body is called budding. Budding in unicellular organism. The nucleus of the parent cell divides into two. One of the nuclei moves into the projection. The bud thus formed can detach from the parent or mother and can exist independently. Also, a chain of buds can be formed from it if it is not detached from the mother cell. Example, yeast cell. Budding in multicellular organism. The body wall gives out a small bulge or protrusion and then gradually enlarge. The bud after detachment from the mother body can lead an independent life. Example, hydra. Types of asexual reproduction in plants. Higher organisms. Modes of vegetative propagation. Modes of vegetative propagation include the production of specialized structures such as tubers, runners, rhizomes, and bulbs. Number 1. A new rose plant can be grown by cutting off a part of the stem of an existing plant with 2 or more nodes and planting it in the ground. A node is a part of the stem from where a leaf grows. This stem grows into a new rose plant. Number 2. Bryophyllum propagates vegetatively by the formation of leaf buds on the margins of a leaf. When the buds come in contact with moist soil, each bud is capable of growing into a new plant. Number 3. Tuber of potato. The potato tuber is a modified stem. Many notches can be seen on the surface of potato. These are called eyes of potato. Each eye of a potato can give rise to a new potato plant. Farmers utilize this capability of potatoes to grow potatoes more quickly, which is not possible by using the seeds of potato.
Spore formation. The thread-like structures that developed on the bread are the hyphae of the bread mold, rhizopus. They are not reproductive parts. On the other hand, the tiny blob on a stick structures are involved in reproduction. The blobs are sporangia, which contain cells, or spores, that can eventually develop into new rhizopus individuals. The spores are covered by thick walls that protect them until they come into contact with another moist surface and can begin to grow. Sexual reproduction. Why the sexual mode of reproduction? The creation of 2 new cells from one involves copying of the DNA as well as of the cellular apparatus. The DNA copying mechanism, as we have noted, cannot be absolutely accurate, and the resultant errors are a source of variations in populations of organisms. Every individual organism cannot be protected by variations, but in a population, variations are useful for ensuring the survival of the species. Each new variation is made in a DNA copy that already has variations accumulated from previous generations. Thus, 2 different individuals in a population would have quite different patterns of accumulated variations. Since all of these variations are in living individuals, it is assured that they do not have any really bad effects. Combining variations from 2 or more individuals would thus create new combinations of variants. The sexual mode of reproduction incorporates such a process of combining DNA from 2 different individuals during reproduction. But this creates a major difficulty. If each new generation is to be the combination of the DNA copies from 2 pre-existing individuals, then each new generation will end up having twice the amount of DNA that the previous generation had. This is likely to mess up the control of the cellular apparatus by the DNA. If the zygote is to grow and develop into an organism which has highly specialized tissues and organs, then it has to have sufficient stores of energy for doing this. In very simple organisms, it is seen that the 2 germ cells are not very different from one another, or may even be similar. But as the body designs become more complex, the germ cells also specialize. One germ cell is large and contains the food stores while the other is smaller and likely to be motile. Conventionally, the motile germ cell is called the male gamete and the germ cell containing the stored food is called the female gamete. We shall see in the next few sections how the need to create these 2 different types of gametes give rise to differences in the male and female reproductive organs and, in some cases, differences in the bodies of the male and female organisms.
Sexual reproduction in plants. Sexual reproduction. When 2 parents are involved, the gamete formation takes. The method is called sexual reproduction. Meiosis happens during gamete formation, which is an important step of sexual reproduction. All flowering plants reproduce sexually as flowers are the reproductive parts of the plant. The stamen is the male reproductive part and the pistil is the female reproductive part of the flower. The flowers which contain either the pistil or stamen are called unisexual flowers. Example: corn, papaya, cucumber. The flowers which contain both stamen and pistil are called bisexual flowers. Example: mustard, rose, and petunia. Both male and female unisexual flowers may be present in the same plant or in different plants. Parts of a flower. Male organs. Around the center of the flower, there are many little stalks with swollen tops. These are called stamen. Stamen is the male reproductive part. Anther is a capsule-like structure at the top of the stamen that contains pollen grains which produces male gametes. Each stamen consists of a green stalk called filament which holds up the anther. Female organs. Pistil. It is the female part of the flower. It is a flask-shaped structure in the middle of the flower. It is divided into three parts. Ovary. The lower broader portion of the pistil is called ovary. It contains the one or more ovules. The female gamete or egg is formed in an ovule. Style. The narrow middle portion of the pistil is called style. It joins the stigma and ovary. Stigma. The sticky end to attract pollen grains at the top of the style is called stigma. In sexual reproduction, male and female gametes fuse to form a zygote. Pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. If the pollen grains lands on the stigma of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. When the pollen of a flower lands on stigma of another flower of the same plant or that of a different plant of the same kind, it is called cross-pollination. Fertilization. After pollination has occurred, the male sex cell needs to get to the female sex cell. The process by which the two sex cells fuse is known as fertilization. Fertilization occurs after a pollen tube is formed, which channels the male sex cell down through the style into the ovary, then into the ovule where fertilization will take place. The cell formed after fertilization is known as a zygote. The zygote develops into the embryo. Meanwhile, walls of the ovule develop into layers and form a seed, and the ovary forms the fruit. Thus, a seed which contains an embryo, stored food, and a protective coat can then germinate and become a new plant.
Reproduction in human beings. Humans use a sexual mode of reproduction. How does this process work? All of us know that our bodies change as we become older. All of these are changes that can be grouped under the general process of growth. But in early teenage years, a whole new set of changes occurs that cannot be explained simply as body enlargement. Instead, the appearance of the body changes, proportions change, and new features appear. Some of these changes are common to both boys and girls. We begin to notice thick hair growing in new parts of the body. Thinner hair can also appear on legs and arms, as well as on the face. On the other hand, there are also changes taking place that are different between boys and girls. In girls, breast development and menstruation occurs on the onset of puberty. In boys, an increase in the size of the testicles. All of these changes take place slowly, over a period of months and years.